Tonight, a notorious murder back in the national spotlight.
Just this week, a wildly controversial parole decision. Is a convicted killer now walking free? An all-new 2020 starts right now.
Pound for pound, one of the greatest true crime stories of all time.
This would turn out to be a notorious, surreal case.
A woman brutally murdered in cold blood.
Investigators at the time believed that Sherry Rasmussen was the victim of a burglary that had turned into her own murder.
As I walked in, there was blood.
She was literally clawing at the front door, trying to get out.
People were on edge during that era. And add to that, we were the serial killer capital of the world.
It's like being hit by a train, just like being hit by a train. I don't usually talk about that day or that time.
How soon was it after the murder that your father and your mother started to think that maybe this wasn't a robbery?
I assumed it was going to be burglars, male burglars.
And there was another piece of evidence that caught the attention of investigators. A bite mark on Sherry's forearm.
A suspect that the LAPD could never have fathomed.
If you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, you can't help but notice the stars on the sidewalk, the glitter in the pavement, and you think to yourself, wow, this is Tinseltown. But it doesn't take long until you realize that there are deep cracks in that pavement, exposing a criminal element you could never have anticipated. And the case of Sherry Rasmussen was a rude awakening for anyone living in La La Land. President Reagan in Los Angeles.
Today, the torch entered the City of Angels
for AIDS Walkathon in Hollywood.
It was 1986. A beautiful young nurse, only 3 months into her marriage, is brutally murdered in her own townhome.
As a television journalist, I've been reporting on true crime stories for decades on numerous outlets. And you think you're never going to be shocked anymore ever again? Well, this proved all that very wrong.
It was a huge story. It had all the elements, sex and betrayal and lies. It just gripped the nation.
It's definitely, pound for pound, one of the greatest true crime stories of all time.
Everything we always heard or was told about Aunt Sherry was about what a great person she was.
Tell me about your sister.
She was the middle sister, and she was a clown. If everything got too serious, she would make everybody laugh.
She had a very unique little giggle.
Uncle John and Aunt Sherry are spending Christmas with Rachel on her first Christmas.
Sherry was all about family. Sherry was our glue. She kept us all together.
From a young age, Sherry, the middle child with that infectious giggle, seemed mature beyond her years, according to her sisters, Connie and Teresa. She leapfrogged from the 8th grade into high school, and Sherry graduated early at the age of just 16 and enrolled in nursing school.
She had certainly an interest in caring for other people.
By the time she was 21, Sherry was fearless and determined, and she moved from her hometown of Tucson, Arizona to Los Angeles.
When she passed away, she was the director of critical care at the Glendale Adventist Hospital.
When I think of Sherry, I think of her kindness and her generosity.
Sherry's father, Nels, who was a dentist, had encouraged her to enroll in medical school to become a doctor, but she had other plans in mind.
Sherry always wanted to have a family and a husband and children.
In the spring of 1984, Sherry met a young engineer named John Rutten.
John Rutten was a tall, handsome, bright, athletic young man from San Diego, California.
Sherry was so tall, she often had difficulty finding guys who weren't intimidated by someone with her stature. And I know that John was just taken with her.
Sherry and John were very happy together. Sherry was always smiling and laughing and happy.
They settled into Sherry's condo in Van Nuys, and in November 1985, the couple got married.
It was a joyous celebration.
You could tell that they were in love.
She was just beginning her life. She'd met the man of her dreams, and she had a great job, and she was doing very well, and it was all coming together. 3 months later, and now it was all gone.
February 24, 1986. John had just returned home from work, and as he's walking up the steps into the townhome, the door is ajar. He walks into the townhome and sees his gorgeous bride dead in a pool of blood on the living room floor. He calls 911.
I was patrolling and I got a call to Balboa Boulevard.
Veteran LAPD patrol officer Rodney Forrest was one of the first cops to arrive at the scene.
The call was a death investigation. I thought that was particularly interesting. Why a murder in a kind of upscale part of town?
When Forrest and his partner got there, they were met with a grim warning from paramedics.
Somebody said, "You're not going to be prepared for what's in there." And I'm thinking, well, I've seen it all, so let's go see. Oh, wow. Well, this brings back memories. It's kind of an eerie feeling to be here after 30 plus, almost 40 years. As I walked in, I saw Sherry Rasmussen on the ground. She had been covered with a towel, and one of the paramedics raised the towel for me to see her face, and she had considerable trauma to her face, and there was blood. I thought after that, this is actually a murder.
At that point, Officer Forrest called the LAPD's Van Nuys division to notify the homicide unit, which took over the investigation.
It's a horribly violent crime. Bruises all over her body. The struggle ensued for quite some time.
My partner went upstairs, checked the upper floor for any suspects, and there were no suspects still around.
Investigators knew that something catastrophic had happened to Miss Rasmussen.
You think, given the ferocity of that fight, that somebody would have heard something?
You would think. It was a heck of a fight. I mean, Sherry fought for her life, literally.
That night, news of Sherry's murder reached her family in Tucson.
I'll probably never forget it, unfortunately. My dad called me to tell me that Sherry was dead. And I was like, I certainly didn't believe it.
Beyond the pale.
Yeah. I was like, no, what are you talking about? That's not true. And he said, no, it is. And then I started screaming.
In the wake of Sherry's murder, her family struggled to understand what had happened. Could this be the result of the rampant violence that had plagued the city of Los Angeles in recent years?
Grim statistic from Los Angeles.
More murders in 1980 than ever before.
In parts of Los Angeles, there is a dangerous new tension.
Or had it been something far more personal?
This was a cold, calculated murder.
When investigators looked further into the crime scene, they uncovered a major clue that could change the course of the investigation.
This would turn out to be a notorious, surreal case with a twist no Hollywood writer could have come up with. For myself, as a reporter in Los Angeles, the 80s was the wild, wild west. Turn on the TV and what are you hearing about? Violent crime.
Crime running unchecked, the police seemingly unable to stop it. That frustration reached the breaking point in one neighborhood in Los Angeles.
Anyone that worked in the city of Los Angeles, they knew that they were going to have their hands filled.
There are more than 100 street gangs in Los Angeles.
It was out of control.
People were on edge during that era. And add to that, we were the serial killer capital of the world.
The Night Stalker killer.
Strangled, tortured bodies were found sprawled on hillsides.
By 1986, the homicide rate in Los Angeles had reached alarming levels. So when Sherry Rasmussen was murdered inside this apartment, it sent neighbors into a panic.
It was a dark period in our history. People were terrified to leave their homes.
Residents bought guns, learned martial arts.
People had bought up every single burglar alarm in the city, and went to the LA County dog pound and literally adopted every single dog for watchdogs.
The home invasion murder, the one similar to Sherry's, is going to cause a lot of fear in the community.
People were nervous. It was certainly a shock for me.
Alan Tarsky lived across the corridor from Sherry, but he says he wasn't home at the time of the murder.
I had come back to work probably 5:45 in the evening, and it was shortly after that that the madness started. I do remember there was electronic stereo equipment right here that I saw when I came in, and that suggested to me that it was possibly a burglary, and a burglary interrupted. I put this together with the stereo equipment stacked over here, and it seemed to me that she could have struggled with the burglar, and she obviously lost that fight.
Sherry's newer model BMW was taken. Her purse was taken.
The Rasmussen crime scene had all the makings of something police call a hot prowl, a home invasion.
Investigators at the time very much believed that Sherry Rasmussen was the victim of a burglary that had turned into her own murder. Based on what investigators could see at the time, it appeared as though Sherry Rasmussen was working at her dining room table on the second level of her condominium when the intruder came in through the front door.
She had ligature marks on her wrists, indicating at some point someone had tied her up.
All over the place in these pictures, you see some of the implements that were used to hit Sherry.
Right.
The vase that was smashed over her head.
The shards had blood on them.
The assailant or assailants were grabbing at anything they could find to make sure this woman didn't breathe another breath.
Her fingernails were left broken at the front door.
Because she was literally clawing at the front door.
Trying to get out.
But before Sherry could escape, she was shot, police say, at point-blank range.
The bullets indicated that a .38 revolver had been used.
It was basically an execution.
Not a single neighbor heard a gunshot, and ballistics tests showed that it appeared the assailant had used that quilt over the barrel of the gun as a silencer.
And there was another piece of evidence that caught the attention of investigators. A bite mark on Sherry's forearm.
They took the sample in an abundance of caution because if there was blood there on that bite mark, it could be possible for blood typing analysis to be done.
I learned later about the bite mark that led into my curiosity of why there was a bite mark on her arm. I had no clue. It kind of reinforced what I was thinking when I initially got there. There was something more than I originally saw.
Former patrol officer Forrest, who wasn't part of the investigation, says to him, the crime scene didn't jibe with the burglary theory.
I thought to myself, this is a burglary? Burglars don't usually pick a place 5 condos from the street. They want to get away. They pick something next to the street. They don't want to be seen. It's just strange that they would pick this place.
Officer Farr says he was also taken by the demeanor of Sherry's husband.
I noticed John Rutten. He was sitting at the table and he seemed to be sobbing. My reaction was his sobbing, his crying should have been more extreme, with his wife laying there on the floor dead. I guess people grieve in different ways.
Did you see John at any point directly after the murder?
We saw him at the Van Nuys police station, and I do remember that he didn't have any marks on him. That's the first thing you look at for any kind of domestic violence. So,
even though he was your brother-in-law, even though you liked him,
yes.
The first thing you did when you saw him is sort of give him a visual inspection, a look over.
Yes.
Did you talk?
We weren't allowed to talk to him. They were keeping everybody separated.
Because the first suspect in murders like this typically is. Rutten wasn't permitted to speak with Sherry's family, but on the night of the murder, he sat down with investigators at the LAPD's Van Nuys station.
You didn't harm your wife, did you, John?
The question for investigators is, was he telling them everything they needed to know to catch a killer? So you and Sherry were living here in Southern California together?
Yes.
How was that?
It was fun. Actually, we also gained Teresa, so all 3 of us were in a mobile home together at Loma Linda.
Oh, wow. The 3 daughters? That must have made your dad so happy.
Yeah.
I've kept a lot of Sherry's clothes.
Now it's all back in style, right?
The 1980s are all coming back.
I remember her telling me that she had met John.
What was your impression of him once you met him?
He was very likable. They made a really a cute couple. They were both tall, thin, athletic, both driven with their careers.
It was a whirlwind romance, and within a year, the 2 were married. And did she seem like she had it all?
Yes. She had a new job that she enjoyed, just got married. She was a new aunt. We were really looking forward to the future.
Family was just so important to her, and you can really see that in the photos and just how happy everyone was together.
Sherry really loved Christmas.
Here's Aunt Sherry.
It was one of her favorite holidays.
Here's John holding his baby niece, Rachel.
Everybody here thinks there's going to be a baby Rutten pretty soon. I think they better talk to Sherry.
This would be Sherry's last Christmas.
Sherry's now showing why she's a leader of nurses.
Just 2 months later, Sherry and John's love story came to a tragic and sudden end. And in the aftermath of her murder, questions would linger.
When you're going through this process, you're pretty much helpless because you have no control. I mean, the information you get is what they give you.
Nels Rasmussen was determined to find out what really happened to his daughter.
And so were the police, who wanted answers. On the night of the murder, Detective Lyle Mayer questioned a very emotional John Rutten on what he knew about the day Sherry was killed.
She had everything going. I mean,
Hey, so do you, buddy? Hey, John, for a couple of minutes, I need you to be tough for me, buddy.
Investigators looked at every possible direction. Of course, they looked at John.
What was the first thing you saw?
well, I saw Sherry lying on, I mean, it's right in front of me when I walked in the door. I saw her lying on the ground. I knew right away that she was dead.
He was shaken up that evening. He did his best to give an interview that helped investigators.
At one point, Detective Mayer asked Rutten Very difficult question.
You didn't harm your wife, did you, John?
No, I didn't. Good.
You didn't harm your wife. Okay, very good.
John Rutten agreed to do a polygraph examination, and the results came back inconclusive, but he had a rock-solid alibi.
He was at work that day. He'd left work, he had stopped and picked up his dry cleaning, and then came back between 6 and 7 p.m. and found his wife murdered in the living room area of the house.
Detective Mayer believed the murder had happened in the early morning hours after Rutten had already left for work.
When I left, she was in bed, but she was awake.
What time did you leave for work?
7:20 is when I left.
What time did you get to work this morning?
I got to work about 10 to 8.
In the eyes of Lyle Mayer, the lead detective, John Rutten was legitimately and seriously a grieving husband. They didn't feel he was hiding anything, and as far as they were concerned, he was not a suspect, and they told him so.
I'm usually a pretty good judge of character, but I'm fairly certain that you have absolutely nothing to do with this. Okay?
Mayer basically made a decision that night based on the evidence that he saw at the crime scene that this was a burglary gone wrong.
I believe your house was burglarized today. Once those persons, or that person, or whoever was inside, I believe they were trying to steal your stereo and probably some other items.
Why would they do anything to her? But why wouldn't they just run?
I don't know, John. I don't know. John, things happen, okay? I think Sherry came down the stairs, and I think she surprised him, and she was hurt. She was shot.
Oh, God.
And Detective Mayer was so convinced he'd solve the case, he even told John Rutten.
John, I know how you feel. I know what you're going through. But we're going to catch these persons, or this person, all right? You got to have a little faith in me. But we're very successful at what we do. Very, very successful.
At this point, detectives don't have a single witness. They have no murder weapon. They have no fingerprints. For even seasoned detectives, there's a lot of work ahead.
But there will soon be a break in the case. These are sketches that were LAPD issued.
Right.
Would another home invasion in the same neighborhood lead investigators to Sherry's killers?
They look like they're from Charlie's Angels.
I know.
So they're almost on different parts of the country, but you had almost the same haircut.
I know. I was still in the stage of shock that this could happen to my sister.
It's like being hit by a train, just like being hit by a train. I'm sorry. I don't usually talk about that day or that time.
Less than a week after Sherry Rasmussen's murder, her loved ones said their painful goodbyes. A heartbroken John Rutten addressed family and friends.
When I saw John at the memorial, he was just ashen. He couldn't stop walking in circles and was just shaking.
And I want you to know that Sherry was the best professional in the world. She was the best wife that anybody could ever have. And she was the best sister, daughter. She wanted to make everybody happy.
You have to understand that was the love of his life. And trying to deal with that grief is devastating.
Back then, investigators wasted no time theorizing what they think happened to Sherry Rasmussen.
They looked at the crime scene. It looked like a burglary, smelled like a burglary.
Not long after Sherry's murder, investigators jump on a new lead. There's been another burglary here in this same Van Nuys neighborhood with a similar MO.
That burglary was interrupted by a woman coming home, seeing two men in her house, one of whom had a gun, and they fled. and witness sketches were produced of those suspects.
These are sketches that were LAPD issued.
Right. These composites were attached to this case. They started to utilize that sketch in this case to see if the persons that were responsible for Sherry's death were the same people that were depicted in that sketch.
Were they ever arrested? Were they ever found?
No, it might as well have been me and you.
Despite these suspects, there was literally nothing that could tie anyone directly to the murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
On the surface, it appeared to be a burglary gone wrong, but not everyone was convinced. How soon was it after the murder that your father and your mother started to think that maybe this wasn't a robbery like police were saying?
The very day we went to the Van Nuys Police Department.
That first day?
It didn't make sense that they wouldn't take anything other than the car and yet fight with her to the extent of her death.
Sherry's father, Nels, believed that there was another reason behind the murder because he says Sherry told him about a series of disturbing events in the weeks and months leading up to her death.
My father told the police about an incident of a nurse that didn't get promoted, and then she was upset with Sherry, and then so she sort of got into an argument with Sherry.
She felt that she had damage to her car, so when Sherry was murdered, that certainly came up to the forefront of my dad's mind that maybe that conflict accelerated.
According to family members, there was another woman who raised alarm bells for her, an ex-girlfriend of John Rutten.
She had come to Sherry's office after they were engaged, and I think she was sort of provocatively dressed and said to Sherry, "When this marriage fails, I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces." And Sherry said, "Don't worry, we won't be needing your services."
Just about a month before the murder, there was an even more disturbing encounter that Sherry, again, told her parents about. She was home getting ready for work and heard something downstairs and went downstairs and found John's ex-girlfriend standing in the living room, and Sherry told her to get out and not come back.
In the days leading up to the murder, Nell said Sherry confided in him that she was being followed by someone who she described as having piercing eyes.
Sherry never disclosed a name for the ex-girlfriend. It would have been nice had we had that, because we would have shared that with the detectives.
Nels claims that he told the original detectives about the alleged incidents involving an ex-girlfriend of Rutten.
One of the original detectives in this case told me personally they had never heard any of those alleged incidents, and none of them were entered into the official case record known as the murder book.
The single most important document in an LAPD homicide investigation is the murder book, and it's basically the place where any investigative work that is conducted, any step that is performed, everything needs to be committed to writing. And the reason that it's so important is that homicide is obviously a case with no statute of limitations.
Nels Rasmussen told me that he had been telling them for years about an ex-girlfriend of John's. When exactly that conversation occurred, he could not tell me, but I believe that it occurred.
But on the night of the murder, John Rutten told Detective Mayer that he didn't know anyone who might want to harm Sherry.
She's not having any problems with an ex-boyfriend or you with an ex-girlfriend?
No.
Has anybody been hitting on her, following her home, or anything like that at all?
I would say nothing out of the ordinary. I don't think there was anything out of the ordinary.
But Rutten says in the days and weeks following the murder, he did tell investigators about an ex-girlfriend, the same one Nell says he mentioned to police. Rutten says he never brought it up in his recorded interview with Detective Mayer because he never considered her a girlfriend. And it never crossed his mind that she could have been involved with Sherry's murder. 2020 reached out to Detective Mayer for a response to the allegations raised by Sherry's family and her husband, but he did not respond. 2020 also reached out to the LAPD regarding those same allegations, and they declined to comment.
I had come to the conclusion in my mind that it was never going to be solved, and it was something that I would have to deal with, the unknowing of what happened.
With 0 suspects, Sherry's homicide investigation was heading toward cold case purgatory.
But years later, with brand new technology and a fresh set of eyes, investigators take another look at the bite mark that was on Sherry's forearm.
And could that be the key that unlocks the mystery of the murder of Sherry Rasmussen?
Times like this, I just need a tissue attached to me.
It has been very difficult to continue to live without Sherry. Sherry was like the bridge to kind of pull us all together.
For Connie Rasmussen, the pain of losing her sister Sherry is felt most when she visits her grave near the family home in Tucson, Arizona.
It's like a heavy weighted blanket sitting on you because you can't move because it's still unresolved.
When Sherry was murdered, my grandfather, he was struggling with the fact that they were unable to find the murderer.
It ate at my dad. You know, as a father, you think, you know, your job is to protect your children. And he felt he had failed that.
Sherry's father, the late Nels Rasmussen, gave this interview shortly before his own death in 2020.
It's probably difficult for people that know me that I hang on the way I do, but I'm learning every day how to deal with this. And I still don't have all the answers. I probably never will.
In 1991, Lyle Mayer, who's the lead detective on the case, retires from the LAPD. And the case is then handed off to other detectives within the Van Nuys homicide unit.
There were no active leads or items that were coming in at the time that were giving investigators new avenues to pursue.
I never thought that time was going to help solve the case, that it was going to ever get solved.
After Sherry's murder, time seemed to stand still for her family. But the decade that followed would bring a new chapter to the City of Angels.
The beating of Rodney King. O.J. Simpson, who's a fugitive.
Freeway that collapsed.
Not guilty of the crime of murder.
Lyle and Eric Menendez found guilty.
Smalls was shot several times. The impact of El Nino.
The Staples Center is just amazing. All beautiful and brand new.
Mr. Gore, the Democratic nominee, is in Los Angeles.
The Lakers gave LA one more thrill.
2001 was also a pivotal year for the Los Angeles Police Department, marking the launch of the LAPD's cold case unit. That year, detectives were handed over 9,000 unsolved murders spanning more than 2 decades. And Sherry Rasmussen's case was one of them.
I was a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department on the cold case squad. Her case was one of the last cases I looked at.
In 2001, Detective Cliff Shepard would oversee the Rasmussen cold case investigation. Why does a case like this go cold for so long?
Manpower, our priorities within the police department.
In fact, Shepard says Sherry's case had barely been touched for 10 years.
Up to that point, nobody else had looked at it other than Mayor and myself, really.
To get started, Shepard said, he made copies of select files from the Rasmussen murder book, creating his own Cliff's Notes. Why not just take the murder book so you have all the evidence with you?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Our problem was space. We were in a little office. It wasn't practical to take the entire murder book.
Breathing life into an old case is no easy feat, especially when you don't have all the evidence. Like a key piece of evidence relating to that bite mark found on Sherry's arm.
When I was going back over the reports, they indicate that a bite swab had been collected. And when I looked at the evidence, no evidence for a bite swab. So I checked with our property. They verified they did not have the swab booked with our evidence room. There's no record of it.
Generally speaking, how often does evidence go missing from a case file?
Extremely rarely, because there are professionals in the evidence rooms. There are professionals at the labs. They document everything.
To track down the swab, Shepard enlisted the help of Jennifer Francis, a criminalist at LAPD's Scientific Investigation Division.
And she had to make several calls, and several searches had to be made before eventually the bite mark swab was located.
Investigators are able to track down that missing bite mark evidence recovered from the murder scene. And the cold case team finds it here in a freezer at the LA County Medical Examiner's office.
The reason why it was way back in the freezer is because all those years ago, it had been tested for blood type. And there it stayed all that time.
By 2001, DNA technology had come into its own, so Francis sent out the swab for analysis. But Shepard says given the LAPD's case backlog, it would take 2 full years for the results to come back. And those results would eventually turn the entire case on its head.
She informed me that I obtained a DNA profile.
The DNA profile was entered into the law enforcement database, but there was no match at the time. So it was a big jump in the case, but it wasn't quite enough.
It gave us a profile, but it didn't give us a name.
With little else to go on, this case is riding on that piece of DNA.
Once you got the DNA, did that prod you into doing any of the other investigative things like interviews?
At that time, no, I couldn't. I had a lot of cases going on, so it was as I had time. I just didn't have enough time. My biggest regret is not interviewing Rutten, the husband, not meeting with him and having a face-to-face. I knew he restarted his life and it was down in the San Diego area. But for me to just leave LA and go down to San Diego to interview him, I had other things going on. I couldn't do that at that time.
By 2005, Detective Shepard had moved on from the Rasmussen cold case investigation. 4 more years would pass before there would be another significant development in the case.
I'm not sure how much work was done between 2005 and 2009. I think it really took somebody going back and going through the murder book in close detail and thinking about this case.
For years, Sherry's cold case would remain unsolved. That is, until investigators took a closer look at the DNA from that bite mark, and it would lead them to a very unlikely suspect, one who had been hiding in plain sight.
I can't remember ever covering a case like this. Sex, lies, law enforcement, innocent victim.
Because what you could tell from the crime scene, there was an assailant, but that Sherry fought back.
Oh, she did.
Incredible vigor and strength.
Absolutely, she did.
If I grab your arm,
yeah,
and you want to release my hand, what's very close exacts. So Sherry Rasmussen knows this is a life and death situation. Sherry tries to escape.
It Co-counsel summarized the case as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart.
Where she talked about her belief that there was a personal motive for this crime.
For a cold case that was running on empty, I mean, this should have jump-started it. Why didn't it?
It didn't give us a name.
They eliminated the first 4 suspects, but they began to zero in on suspect number 5.
And suspect number 5 just happens to be a cop.
Can you imagine that moment? After all these years, the answer is behind a badge.
It's crazy that you've been working just down the hall from the murderer you've been looking for years.
Yes.
February 24th, 1986, investigators get a 911 call to respond to the condominium of John Rutten and Sherry Rasmussen. When they arrive, John is distraught. He has just found his newlywed wife laying on the living room floor.
Sherry Rasmussen was attacked in her home, bludgeoned, and then executed, shot 3 times while she was down on the ground.
The investigators also found a bite wound on her forearm.
This will be important in the case because the bite marks will leave DNA.
But in 1986, DNA testing was just in its infancy.
Detectives don't have a single witness. They have no murder weapon.
Nobody really saw anything.
Detectives at the time characterized it as a burglary gone wrong.
And the trail went cold for 15 years.
But in 2001, the LAPD formed a new cold case unit to look into cases that would qualify for DNA testing.
Investigators had reignited that cold case on the back of DNA evidence stored here. Criminalist Jennifer Francis, who'd been instrumental in tracking down and testing the bite mark swab, had a stunning revelation. It was female DNA.
I assumed it was going to be burglars, male burglars. A female? Who is she?
Once you got the DNA, you realized it was a woman. Were you curious about the fact that a woman might have been involved?
I was curious what woman.
This could be the break that the LAPD needs.
I think there are times that we felt Sherry's case would never be solved, but with the results of the DNA, it gave us renewed hope that Sherry's killer would be brought to justice.
The DNA analysis that revealed Sherry was bitten by a woman seemed not to have any effect on the direction of the LAPD's investigation.
Because what you could tell from the crime scene is that there was an assailant, but that Sherry fought back with incredible vigor and strength.
And I thought, okay, we've got one with the gun, doesn't want to use it. The other one's, presumably the female who helps her partner out when he's starting to get beaten up.
By 2005, Detective Shepard had moved on from the Rasmussen cold case investigation. The bite mark came back to a female when it was tested for DNA back in 2005. For a cold case that was running on empty, I mean, this should have jump-started it. Why didn't it?
It didn't give us a name. It gave us a profile, but it didn't give us a name.
4 years went by with no forward momentum. But in 2009, a detective by the name of Jim Nuttall, assigned to the Van Nuys division, received the Rasmussen case file to check for updates as part of cold case standard procedure.
One of the first things that Nuttall notices is this 4-year-old DNA report by Jennifer Francis that indicates that it was a woman who attacked and killed Sherry.
And he just isn't buying the burglary story. Near the door, there were stacked stereo components, which ostensibly you'd think the burglars were going to grab on their way out.
It made him believe that the murder occurred first and that they were intentionally left there.
Nuttall and his team of detectives believe that this may have been personal. They conduct new interviews with those close to Sherry, including her parents and her husband, John Rutten.
He wanted to exclude all of the potential female sources or female individuals that were surrounding Sherry's life at the time.
The detectives make a list of 5 women in Sherry's orbit and eliminate them as suspects one by one. Sherry's mother and sister Teresa were on the list, as was her good friend Jane Goldberg.
They took my DNA. The one detective came unannounced, and he said, I'm just coming to get a DNA swab.
The first 3 suspects on the list were able to be eliminated almost immediately. The 4th name on the list was a nursing colleague. There was an indication of tension and bad blood between them.
Investigators obtained a DNA sample from her, which didn't match that from the bite mark.
They eliminated the first 4 suspects, but they began to zero in on suspect number 5.
It's suspect number 5 that grabs the attention of detectives. Rutten told Detective Nuttall about an old friend and former romantic partner named Stephanie Lazarus.
Once number 5 was developed by Detective Nuttall, Detective Nuttall spoke to John Rutten again to learn a little bit more about his connection with Stephanie Lazarus.
We want to walk you through a timeline. It's very important. Starting, we believe we're close, but we'll have to have you kind of spell this out for us.
Rutten tells Detective Nuttall that Stephanie Lazarus is a name he's already given to detectives decades earlier.
I know that she went to go see Sherry, and I know that she was upset, that we weren't going to have the relationship. That's the reason for identifying her. So that's the reason I identified her 23 years ago, when we talked. One of my concerns is that was never, appears to be recorded.
And we know files.
I'm not trying to be inflammatory.
There's a certain level of frustration on our part.
Yeah,
more should have been documented. We're now forced 23 years later to literally almost start over again because we lack the documentation that would have been crucial in this case.
There's no official record of Rutten mentioning Lazarus at the onset of the investigation, but there's a single reference made in the case file nearly 2 years after the murder.
And it's a notation along the lines of John Rutten called Stephanie Lazarus P/O, ex-girlfriend.
And when John Rutten spoke with the cold case detectives, he confirmed the meaning behind that P/O.
I gave him the name and I said she's a police officer.
Not only was Lazarus a police officer, but she's still on active duty as a detective.
Think about this. You're the cold case unit investigating one of your own, and her office is just down the hall on the 3rd floor of police headquarters. Police like to talk, that's why they're cops. They ask questions. These cops needed to keep this quiet.
For over 2 decades, Sherry Rasmussen's murder went unsolved. Until 2009, when cold case investigators began zeroing in on Stephanie Lazarus, a 25-year veteran of the LAPD. She'd been hiding in plain sight all along.
She presented herself as very smart, capable, athletic. She was a Division I athlete.
Lazarus's connection to the Rasmussen case was through Sherry's husband. Her history with John Rutten went back more than 30 years when they first met as students at UCLA.
And Stephanie made no bones about the fact that she envisioned a big romantic future with John Rutten. The problem is that John has never, in his own words, looked at her in the same way.
After Stephanie graduated from UCLA, she joined the LAPD in the early 1980s. At a time when the department was striving to bring more women onto the police force.
She seemed to excel and do well in specialized assignments, but it was always competitive.
And that competitive fire, coupled with being a stellar athlete, was a perfect entree for Lazarus to participate in the California Police Olympics.
The California Police Olympics were an athletic competition open to police officers throughout the state.
Anita Ortega was one of the other few female LAPD officers at the time and a teammate of Lazarus.
Stephanie was an outstanding athlete and a basketball player. I thought her tenacity was incredible. She never quit.
She may have been tenacious on the hardwood, but off the court, Anita got to know a softer side of her teammate.
Seemed like a very nice person, always energetic, just happy-go-lucky kind of person. Really enjoyed hanging around her. Stephanie shared with me that she met her boyfriend, John, at UCLA. Said he was a great guy. I never met him, but I thought they were going to get married.
Thing was, not only was Lazarus not dating John in the summer of 1985, he was engaged to Sherry Rasmussen.
Stephanie never mentioned Sherry to me or the fact that John was in another relationship.
But entries in Lazarus's own diary seem to reveal her despair after learning that Rutten was getting married. Stephanie Lazarus had a 600-page diary. What was the story that it told?
There were these tidbits of information right up to the wedding, right up to the killing, where she was indicating to herself how despondent she was.
Despite her apparent inner turmoil, to outside appearances, Lazarus seemed upbeat and happy.
She had a really nice smile, bright eyes, just a real positive kind of personality about her.
Fitness trainer Brian Brazzi says he had an immediate connection with Lazarus, but then just a few weeks after meeting, Brazzi says there's an odd encounter at his apartment.
There was a knock on my door. 2 female police officers fully uniformed at my door, Stephanie Lazarus being one of them, showing up unannounced. I had never given her my address.
Brazzi says it's an uncomfortable moment, and he doesn't invite the women into his one-room studio apartment. Stephanie had shown up for reasons unknown, he says, and just as quickly, she leaves.
I really didn't know what to say or how to react.
Brazzi says despite his discomfort over that visit, the two decided to go out on a date anyway. But when he later had to break the date, Brazzi says he saw a different side of Lazarus.
The next time I saw her, the look that she gave me was like just dark and menacing, and I just kind of stopped in my tracks.
By the spring of 1986, after Sherry Rasmussen's murder, Lazarus's career at the LAPD was thriving.
Daryl Gates and the rest of the LAPD brass loved Stephanie Lazarus because having her face out there, her exuberance, her athleticism, it got people excited. She was a walking, talking recruitment drive. She even made an appearance on the game show Family Feud, pitted against arch rivals, the LA Fire Department.
She continued on an upward trajectory, and she became a detective for the Los Angeles Police Department.
In 1992, she was assigned to the Personnel Division as a background investigator, someone interviewing and passing judgment on applicants to the LAPD.
It seems eventually Stephanie puts John Rutten behind her. She marries another police officer, and the couple adopt a beautiful young daughter.
One of her last assignments was to be assigned to the art theft detail, a very specialized division.
The art theft detail investigated anything that was of value that was stolen as art.
At the time, the unit was the only one of its kind in the country, and with its rich and famous clientele, attracted local media attention.
I was a contributing writer to the LA Weekly, and I had heard about Don Harisik, who ran the art theft detail. So he reluctantly agreed to do an interview with me.
Also in attendance, the junior member of the unit, Detective Stephanie Lazarus.
Every time I talked to Don Harisik, Stephanie Lazarus interrupted me, and she kept interjecting snide, sarcastic, and semi-humorous comments after my questions. It was extremely disruptive. I asked Detective Lazarus, what do you know about art? And her answer was, it hangs on the wall.
By 2009, the future looks bright for Stephanie Lazarus. She has a family now and is working in a prestigious unit.
She seemed like the happiest, luckiest person in LAPD.
All seems great. She has no clue that a net is closing in around her.
Stephanie, I don't know if you know my partner.
Hey, great.
Hi.
Sure, nice to meet you.
See you guys.
How's it going?
Good.
Have a seat.
It's June of 2009, and Stephanie Lazarus has unwittingly walked into her own interrogation for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. It's been 4 months since cold case detective Jim Nuttall first opened the case file and started carefully and quietly piecing together what he believed happened 23 years earlier.
When detectives zeroed in on Stephanie Lazarus, one of their own, it appeared that they really wanted to keep that close to the vest.
How important and how difficult was it to keep this under wraps and keep it secret?
The detectives took every effort to scrub her name from their investigation. Any references to her at that point were only oblique references like suspect number 5.
You know, it's difficult to track your own and know that one of your own is being accused of a crime or something illegal.
And to complicate matters, Lazarus's office is right down the hall from robbery homicide.
So the determination was made to not contact Stephanie Lazarus directly and to collect a sample of her DNA surreptitiously.
This is where the Special Investigations Section comes into play. Now, this group, SIS, their job is watching Stephanie, following her, and get evidence.
As luck would have it, she went to Costco a couple days after the surveillance had started, and she had a drink. And once she discarded that drink, the officers were able to collect her cup without her knowing it.
And when you collect the DNA from the cup, you match it against whoever the suspect number 5 is. What did they get?
They matched her DNA to the bite mark sample.
Can you imagine that moment? After all these years, and now we know the answer is behind a badge.
The DNA is a match, but cold case detectives still have to confront her face to face.
One of the detectives approaches Stephanie one day in her office, and he says something to the effect of, you know, Stephanie, we've got this suspect who seems to know about some big art heist. He's down in the lockup. We need to bring you down there.
Instead, it was just another detective. And so that was the stage that was set for that interview.
We've been assigned a case that we've been looking at.
Okay.
It's a new case.
So through the course of this police interview with Stephanie Lazarus, they are recording. She doesn't know.
Do you know John Rutten?
John Rutten?
Rutten.
Oh, yeah, I went to school with him. What's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Immediately, they start talking about the Sherry Rasmussen murder.
Do you know what the circumstances were regarding her death?
Jeez, let me think back. Geez, I don't know if it was, if it was a burglary or something.
She's using every skill she has to talk her way out of being connected to this in any way.
Connected to the crime or her old flame, John Rutten.
We dated. I can't say that he was my boyfriend. I don't know that he would consider me his girlfriend.
The detectives were able to get Stephanie Lazarus to confirm that she had gone to her hospital to speak with Sherry Rasmussen.
And yeah, I may have met her at a hospital.
But being that you're kind of used to see John, was everything okay between you guys? I mean, there was never anything uncomfortable or anything between you and her?
You know, I don't know. I mean, it's been so many years.
You're probably a student of liars at this point in your career. Does that seem like a particularly adept liar to you?
It was gold for us because we had all of the evidence that disproved everything that she was saying.
Finally, when they say to her, we think we've got DNA from the crime scene, boom.
Because now I'm thinking I probably need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
because I know how this stuff works, okay?
She knows.
She absolutely knows. She knows at that point that she talked way too long.
And now it almost sounds like you're trying to pin something on me.
When the interview ended, you can hear her getting arrested.
Stephanie, you know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
You want to talk to us right now?
No.
All right. Okay.
This is crazy.
At this point, had you heard the name Stephanie Lazarus?
No. The only Lazarus I knew was the man raised from the dead that Jesus did. That's it.
This is the case that rose from the dead.
Yeah, it did.
On the third floor of Parker Center this morning, police detectives arrested one of their own.
Detectives assigned to the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division, Cold Case Squad, arrested Los Angeles Police Detective Stephanie Lazarus.
It's crazy that you'd been working just down the hall from the murderer you'd been looking for years.
Yes.
Stephanie Lazarus didn't quite serve and protect, did she?
No.
When they said it was a police officer, I went, you're kidding. Absolutely kidding. A police officer committed this crime. I couldn't imagine that.
I was very shocked, but I also know how effective DNA testing is. And it kind of made me realize that, yeah, Stephanie must have committed the murder.
They were kind enough to come to our home and let my parents know that they had made the arrest. I mean, I cried because I was so excited, number one, that justice for my sister, but also for my dad.
I was so relieved and so happy and so sad. We had waited so long, but at last.
I'm totally in shock.
It was just a stunning turn of events. Then a whole new chapter begins.
The prosecution is armed with what appears to be rock-solid evidence. But this is LA, after all, and strange things have been known to happen in court. So, you have to wonder, would a jury really believe a veteran detective is capable of committing a cold-blooded murder? 26 years after Sherry Rasmussen was murdered, the Stephanie Lazarus case finally comes to a courthouse here in downtown Los Angeles. A Los Angeles police detective accused of murdering her rival. That sounds more like a Hollywood blockbuster than a decades-old cold case finally going to trial. At her arraignment, Stephanie Lazarus pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder.
There was a lot of buzz in the air, folks across the country very interested in this case. And why wouldn't they be? It's sex, lies, law enforcement, an innocent victim.
I covered the trial from A to Z, had a side view at Stephanie Lazarus. She sat in that orange jumpsuit. What a dichotomy from her police blues.
Your co-counsel summarized the case as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart.
Right. It highlighted all of the strong pieces of evidence.
So the bite mark, of course, referred to the DNA evidence found on Sherry Rasmussen's left forearm. The prosecution considered this their ace in the hole.
You had 4 separate analyses done, so by far that was the most important piece of evidence.
To explain how the bite mark got there, prosecutors presented their theory of how they believe Stephanie Lazarus was able to attack and kill Sherry Rasmussen. Stephanie Lazarus points the gun. Sherry grabs the arm.
If I grab your arm,
yeah,
and you want to release my hand, or get me to release my hand,
try to do this, or
you could grab me, or what's very close, exactly.
And the prosecution described the terrifying details about how they say Sherry attempted to escape with her life.
Stephanie Lazarus fires that gun twice, and 2 shots go out the backslider. So Sherry Rasmussen knows this is a life and death situation. Sherry tries to escape, and she goes down these stairs. She did not get out. They collected her fingernails at the front door.
Because she was literally clawing at the front door.
Trying to get out. Stephanie was able to get her to the living room floor and hit her over the head with the pottery and hit her again with the firearm in the face. At that point, Stephanie grabs this quilt and wraps the gun with this quilt. And she muffles the sound of those gunshots by putting that quilt right up to Sherry's chest and shooting 3 times.
Then there was the matter of the so-called broken heart described by the prosecution.
Sifting through her diary, there were these tidbits of information where she was having contact with John Rutten. She would see John, she would follow John, she would stalk John.
In Lazarus's journal, she wrote things such as, "I saw John Rutten's car. I put a note on it and watched the car for half an hour. I did visit John Rutten, but his girlfriend was over. I really didn't feel like working. Too stressed out about John. I have a real hard time concentrating these days."
When Stephanie's journals were entered into evidence, it clearly identified to me that she really never gave up on her obsession with John.
John Rutten testified about his love for his wife and how he did not expect or know that Stephanie was capable of committing this crime.
Rutten said he never once promised anything to Stephanie. He described a friendly relationship that involved casual sex. But then he made a jaw-dropping admission, something he had told investigators back in 2009. After he got engaged, he gets a call from Stephanie. He reveals that somehow they ended up in bed and had sex.
When John was on the stand, I learned for the first time that he had relations with the defendant shortly before marrying my sister, and that was very devastating.
When it came time for the defense to present its case, Lazarus's attorney, Mark Overland, tried to cast doubt on the chain of custody on the bite mark swab, suggesting that the evidence was tainted and Lazarus may have been framed.
The envelope that the vial was stored in was found in a pretty ratty condition.
He showed it to the jury. Would you trust this? You don't know who opened that vial.
The strength of this evidence is that each piece was collected over a course of a long period of time, which would have made framing Stephanie Lazarus extremely implausible, if not impossible.
In his closing argument, defense attorney Mark Overland claimed those journal entries didn't amount to obsession, arguing John was mentioned only 5 times among almost 600 pages. After almost 3 weeks of trial, the case went to the jury. They returned with a verdict in less than 2 days.
We, the jury, in the above-entitled action, find the defendant, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, guilty of the crime of murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
It was just like a rush of relief that it's over.
Relief for my father that he finally was vindicated and he had his answer.
Stephanie Lazarus' sentencing hearing was held in March of 2012.
So People versus Stephanie Lazarus. Matter is set today for sentencing.
A statement from Nels Rasmussen was read by the prosecutor.
Sherry was a beautiful, talented, gifted person and a loving daughter. Her senseless death caused pain that will never, ever heal.
And John Rutten tried to describe the heavy burden it seems he will carry for the rest of his life.
I'm John Rutten. The fact that Sherry's death occurred because she met and married me brings me to my knees. I have resigned myself to trying to endure the daydreams about a world where Sherry is still with us, and this pointless tragedy never occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Rudden.
The judge is about to announce Stephanie Lazarus' sentence for first-degree murder and use of a gun.
Court will now pronounce sentence.
But this case is far from over. Sherry Rasmussen's friends and family have no idea about the shocking turn of events that await them in the not-too-distant future. Will a killer walk free? It's March 2012, and Stephanie Lazarus has just been found guilty for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
Never admitting guilt, Lazarus waved goodbye and smiled to her family as she left the courtroom.
What was her sentence? She received 25 to life first-degree murder and 2 years for the use of a gun.
There had never been an arrest of an active LAPD detective for murder under circumstances this salacious, a cold case. And once the Rasmussens stepped forward, allegations of a cover-up.
LAPD should want to know why it took so long, and there should be accountability for that passage of time.
The Rasmussens took action in two ways. One was to file a complaint directly with the LAPD alleging a cover-up to protect Officer Lazarus from criminal prosecution. They also filed a civil lawsuit against the LAPD, making the same allegation.
The day that Stephanie Lazarus was arraigned, the Rasmussens asked to get answers as to what happened in 1986 and what happened that nothing was done despite our repeated requests.
The LAPD denied the Rasmussens' allegations, citing immunity, and the lawsuit was eventually dismissed because of the statute of limitations. As for the complaint the Rasmussens filed directly with the LAPD's Internal Affairs Department launched an investigation in response to the allegations. Journalist Matthew McGough obtained a copy of the Internal Affairs file, which wasn't released publicly.
A total of 6.8 hours were devoted to trying to determine whether or not Stephanie Lazarus was protected in an internal cover-up. More than a year passed before it was closed with no one being interviewed, no investigative conclusions.
The Rasmussen complaint was classified as unfounded because the judge had dismissed the LAPD from any liability. 2020 reached out to the LAPD with questions about the handling of this case, and they declined to comment. While the Rasmussen family continued to raise questions about why Lazarus was not arrested for so long, they were certain that she'd spent at least decades behind bars. But just last November, there was a development that took everyone by surprise.
It was late 2023 when Stephanie had her first appearance before the California Parole Board. This was years before anybody thought she'd be eligible for early release.
It turns out, in the years since Lazarus's conviction, the state of California passed a new law giving special consideration towards paroling so-called youthful offenders who had committed their crimes when they were under the age of 26. Lazarus was 25 when she murdered Sherry Rasmussen. Letters supporting Lazarus's release were submitted to the parole board by friends, family, and fellow prisoners.
She took responsibility for committing the murder for the first time, something that she had denied throughout her trial and throughout her incarceration until all of her appeals were exhausted.
She showed absolutely no remorse and brushed it off as if my Aunt Sherry did not fight her, then she wouldn't have fight back, that she wouldn't have killed her.
The only reason she confessed is because she wants to get out on parole.
And at the conclusion of that parole hearing, Lazarus, to the outrage of many, was granted parole. What was your reaction to her being granted this parole?
It was a miscarriage of justice.
However, before that decision became final, California Governor Gavin Newsom intervened in the case and requested it go to the full parole board for reconsideration. Have you made it your mission to try to keep Stephanie Lazarus behind bars?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to do everything in my power.
In a follow-up hearing with the full parole board, Sherry's supporters came out in force to argue against Lazarus's release.
Moderator, we will now take speakers in opposition to Stephanie Lazarus.
She deceived and lied to everyone for almost 40 years. How can this board believe that she has changed?
Before he died, Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, recorded a video message to be played in the event that Stephanie Lazarus ever came up for parole.
If one looks at the damage that she did to my daughter's face, it's almost like she wanted to destroy the beauty that Sherry exuded.
The board's earlier decision to approve parole was put on hold pending yet another review.
I say expect the worst and prepare for our next step when that happens.
And what's that next step?
Just keep fighting.
For the family and everyone else concerned, the day has arrived where we'll find out if Stephanie Lazarus is released or remains behind bars.
My dad had a boat down in San Diego. We enjoyed the ocean and the beaches.
Was part of your father lost when the killer wasn't found?
I think I would say yes. I mean, she was just glued to my dad. We have lots of pictures of them just arm in arm.
And he never stopped fighting for her?
Nope, never.
And that struggle to keep Sherry's killer behind bars came to a head just this week as parole officials met for the third time to determine Stephanie Lazarus's fate.
I served as the pool reporter for the parole rescission hearing held for Stephanie Lazarus. After Lazarus, her attorney, and all the victim's family and representatives had spoken, the commissioners announced that they would adjourn to deliberate, and after about 25 minutes or so, announced their decision.
Stephanie Lazarus will not be released from prison, at least for now. A panel decided to rescind her parole.
The parole board's decision in the hearing was unanimous. Lazarus did not speak about the crime itself or express any remorse to the family members of Sherry who were there.
She was denied parole. It's most likely that she would appeal it and ask for another parole hearing every year. So the victim's family will go through this every year.
And as long as Stephanie Lazarus tries to win her freedom, Teresa, Connie, and their children say they'll continue the fight to keep her behind bars.
Teresa and I have continued to battle on behalf of our sister, Sherry.
We really have to keep her in because she has no regard for what she did. She does not have remorse.
I remember promising my grandparents that we would always continue the fight.
We're fortunate enough to have 3 children, all girls. Sherry was the middle one. But in many respects, Sherry was the one that held not only her sisters together, but her mom and dad.
My Aunt Sherry no longer being with our family has left a hole that can never be filled. The memories we could have had.
How would you like Sherry to be remembered?
She was a very kind-hearted person. She was funny.
She was just a wonderful, wonderful person who touched everybody she came in contact with.
I think about her every day.
I mean, I have this picture in my house. I wake up, I see her.
I don't think Sherry is ever gone. She's always here.
Sherry Rasmussen's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Stephanie Lazarus in 2016 and won a judgment of $10 million.
It'll be 4 months before Stephanie Lazarus is eligible for a new parole hearing. That is our program for tonight. I'm David Muir. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
Confront her face to face.
One of the detectives approaches Stephanie one day in her office, and he says something to the effect of, Stephanie, we've got this suspect who seems to know about some big art heist. He's down in the lockup. We need to bring you down there.
Instead, it was just another detective. And so that was the stage that was set for that interview.
We've been assigned a case that we've been looking at.
Okay.
It's a new case.
So through the course of this police interview with Stephanie Lazarus, they are recording. She doesn't know.
Do you know John Rutten?
John Rutten?
Rutten.
Oh, yeah, I went to school with him. What's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Immediately, they start talking about the Sherry Rasmussen murder.
Do you know what the circumstances were regarding her death?
Geez, let me think back. I don't know if it was, if it was a burglary or something.
She's using every skill she has to talk her way out of being connected to this in any way.
Connected to the crime or her old flame, John Rutten?
We dated. I can't say that he was my boyfriend. I don't know that he would consider me his girlfriend.
The detectives were able to get Stephanie Lazarus to confirm that she had gone to her hospital to speak with Sherry Rasmussen.
And yeah, I may have met her at a hospital.
But being that you're kind of used to see John, was everything okay between you guys? I mean, there was never anything uncomfortable or anything between you and her?
I don't know. I mean, it's been so many years.
You're probably a student of liars at this point in your career. Does that seem like a particularly adept liar to you?
It was gold for us because we had all of the evidence that disproved everything that she was saying.
Finally, when they say to her, we think we've got DNA from the crime scene, boom.
Because now
because
now I'm thinking I probably need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
because I know how this stuff works, okay?
She knows. She absolutely knows. She knows at that point that she talked way too long.
And now it almost sounds like you're trying to pin something on me.
When the interview ended, you can hear her getting arrested.
Stephanie, you know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
You want to talk to us right now?
No.
All right. Okay.
This is crazy.
At this point, had you heard the name Stephanie Lazarus?
No. The only Lazarus I knew was the man raised from the dead that Jesus did. That's it.
This is the case that rose from the dead.
Yeah, it did.
On the third floor of Parker Center this morning, police detectives arrested one of their own.
Detectives assigned to the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division, Cold Case Squad, arrested Los Angeles Police Detective Stephanie Lazarus.
It's crazy that you've been working just down the hall from the murderer you'd been looking for years.
Yes.
Stephanie Lazarus didn't quite serve and protect, did she?
No.
When they said it was a police officer, I went, you're kidding. Absolutely kidding. A police officer committed this crime. I couldn't imagine that.
I was very shocked, but I also know how effective DNA testing is. And it kind of made me realize that, yeah, Stephanie must have committed the murder.
They were kind enough to come to our home and let my parents know that they had made the arrest. I mean, I cried because I was so excited, number one, that justice for my sister, but also for my dad.
I was so relieved and so happy and so sad. We had waited so long, but at last.
I'm totally in shock.
It was just a stunning turn of events. Then a whole new chapter begins.
The prosecution is armed with what appears to be rock-solid evidence. But this is LA, after all, and strange things have been known to happen in court. So, you have to wonder, would a jury really believe a veteran detective is capable of committing a cold-blooded murder? 26 years after Sherry Rasmussen was murdered, the Stephanie Lazarus case finally comes to a courthouse here in downtown Los Angeles. A Los Angeles police detective accused of murdering her rival. That sounds more like a Hollywood blockbuster than a decades-old cold case finally going to trial. At her arraignment, Stephanie Lazarus pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder.
There was a lot of buzz in the air, folks across the country very interested in this case, and why wouldn't they be? It's sex, lies, law enforcement, an innocent victim.
I covered the trial from A to Z, had a side view at Stephanie Lazarus. She sat in that orange jumpsuit. What a dichotomy from her police blues.
Your co-counsel summarized the case as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart.
Right. It highlighted all of the strong pieces of evidence.
So the bite mark, of course, referred to the DNA evidence found on Sherry Rasmussen's left forearm. The prosecution considered this their ace in the hole.
You had 4 separate analyses done, so by far that was the most important piece of evidence.
To explain how the bite mark got there, prosecutors presented their theory of how they believe Stephanie Lazarus was able to attack and kill Sherry Rasmussen. Stephanie Lazarus points the gun. Sherry grabs the arm.
If I grab your arm,
yeah,
and you want to release my hand, or get me to release my hand,
try to do this, or
you could grab me, or what's very close, exactly.
And the prosecution described the terrifying details about how they say Sherry attempted to escape with her life.
Stephanie Lazarus fires that gun twice, and 2 shots go out the backslider. So Sherry Rasmussen knows this is a life and death situation. Sherry tries to escape, and she goes down these stairs. She did not get out. They collected her fingernails at the front door.
Because she was literally clawing at the front door.
Trying to get out. Stephanie was able to get her to the living room floor and hit her over the head with the pottery and hit her again with the firearm in the face. At that point, Stephanie grabs this quilt and wraps the gun with this quilt. And she muffles the sound of those gunshots by putting that quilt right up to Sherry's chest and shooting 3 times.
Then there was the matter of the so-called broken heart described by the prosecution.
Sifting through her diary, there were these tidbits of information where she was having contact with John Rutten. She would see John, she would follow John, she would stalk John.
In Lazarus's journals, she wrote things such as, "I saw John Rutten's car. I put a note on it and watched the car for half an hour. I did visit John Rutten, but his girlfriend was over. I really didn't feel like working. Too stressed out about John. I have a real hard time concentrating these days."
When Stephanie's journals were entered into evidence, it clearly identified to me that she really never gave up on her obsession with John.
John Rutten testified about his love for his wife and how he did not expect or know that Stephanie was capable of committing this crime.
Rutten said he never once promised anything to Stephanie. He described a friendly relationship that involved casual sex. But then he made a jaw-dropping admission, something he had told investigators back in 2009. After he got engaged, he gets a call from Stephanie. He reveals that somehow they ended up in bed and had sex.
When John was on the stand, I learned for the first time that he had relations with the defendant shortly before marrying my sister, and that was very devastating.
When it came time for the defense to present its case, Lazarus's attorney, Mark Overland, tried to cast doubt on the chain of custody on the bite mark swab, suggesting that the evidence was tainted and Lazarus may have been framed.
The envelope that the vial was stored in was found in a pretty ratty condition.
He showed it to the jury. Would you trust this? You don't know who opened that vial.
The strength of this evidence is that each piece was collected over a course of a long period of time, which would have made framing Stephanie Lazarus extremely implausible, if not impossible.
In his closing argument, defense attorney Mark Overland claimed those journal entries didn't amount to obsession, arguing John was mentioned only 5 times among almost 600 pages. After almost 3 weeks of trial, the case went to the jury. They returned with a verdict in less than 2 days.
We, the jury, in the above-entitled action, find the defendant, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, guilty of the crime of murder of Sherry Rasmussen.
It was just like a rush of relief.
I think that anyone who becomes a prosecutor realizes the cases that you care about the most are the ones when the most innocent of us are hurt or murdered. If you can't protect them, then what are you doing? My grandma was 99 when she passed away, and I remember thinking, oh, she's super safe. When she went to her retirement home, nothing can happen to her. You have to feel that way. You need to feel that way. But in 2018, law enforcement officers around Dallas, Texas, happened upon a serial killer that was preying on a world of very vulnerable victims. Everyone assumed since the victims were older, they were dying of natural causes. But these were not natural deaths, it was murder. And the killer was able to take the lives of over 20 people.
Police say they plan to review every single death of an elderly woman in the area where there was no witness.
that morning. I was out running errands, and Scott called me and said he got a call from somebody who said that Mom didn't make it to the Dallas Cowboys watching party, and she wasn't at church.
It's terrifying when you get that call that somebody who's very reliable, who never missed a Cowboy game in the history of the Cowboys, was missing church, missing her friends, missing that Cowboy party, and not answering her phone. You panic. After calling our mother multiple times and her not answering, then it was very obvious there was something wrong. I contacted Rob, and we headed straight to the house.
I was the first one there, unlocked the door, called for her, ran through the living room, and I saw her feet sticking out on the side of the bed. She was really pale. Her arm was across her face. I took her arm across, and her glasses were all messed up. She was unresponsive, dead on her bedroom floor.
I'm just in shock.
2 weeks before, the doctor said, perfect health, you're going to live another 20 years. What happened?
Your brain's trying to process that this woman that you'd spent Christmas with a week before is laying crumpled on the floor, dead. Rob stepped out to call 911. This flood of people to start rolling in. First responders, the EMTs, then the police show up. The detective had told me they've looked her over. They don't see any signs of a struggle, no bruising. They turned her back. Everything was fine.
We asked the police, hey, we noticed that she was missing her rings on her fingers, her wedding ring and then the ring that my dad got her.
That she never took off. These were fixtures, and they were gone.
And they say old people hide stuff. The police didn't think there was any foul play. It was natural causes.
Our mother was very engaged in church, very supportive of the community. She was a very positive person. She was very optimistic. Things were always going to work out, keep a positive attitude, look to the future, be nice to people. Things tend to work out. That was kind of how she lived her life.
Sweet, sweet lady.
Couldn't have asked for a better woman to raise us, to be there for us through our entire lives.
When you think of the safest, nicest, most well-off part of Dallas County, you think of Plano, Texas. It's where you go when you have everything. So if your mother is retired there, living in a home there, you're going to think she's pretty safe. But in 2018, all that was put into question.
Plano 911, what's the emergency?
We have a neighbor that we cannot awake.
Okay, is she
Yes,
breathing?
she is breathing.
Okay, and how old are they?
She must be almost 90.
Okay.
We can't wake her up.
After the paramedic spoke with Mary Bartell, he felt there was something more to this story, and he wanted an officer to investigate this. I responded to the hospital, spoke with Mary Bartell, introduced myself to her, and asked her if she would tell me in her own words what had happened. At around 8:30 in the morning, she walks to her front door after hearing constant knocking. As she was going to the door, this suspect pushes his way in. First thing she sees and focuses on is his green gloves. He told her to go to the bed, and she just complied. When she got to the bed, he pushed her down, grabbed one of her pillows from her bed, and put it on top of her face and chest and just pushed down real hard. Mary Bartell thought she was going to die. That's the last she remembers. Mary Bartell states that she was missing jewelry, rings that she had on both of her hands, one of those rings being a wedding ring that she's had for 50 years and never really took it off. My first priority was to get an investigator to Mary Bartell's house. So I contact another detective, and as she was going to process Mary Bartell's crime scene, she learns there is a suspicious death investigation right across the hall, which is Ann Conklin's residence. So at that point, the Plano Police Department was investigating one death, Ann Conklin, and attempted murder on Mary Bartell to see if they were related or not. We started to do a canvas, looking for any other witnesses, any other video, anything that would give us a lead. We learned that just a few days before, on March 15th, a gentleman by the name of Richard Plink picked up his mother to take her to a doctor's appointment and observed this black male, well-dressed, sitting in his Nissan Altima at Preston Place. And later, he noticed the same person was still in the same parking lot, but at a different parking spot. He just thought it was weird, so he asked him if he could help him with anything. And this man stated that he was fine, that he was just waiting for his next therapy appointment. That's not really unusual because there's older people in that community, but that was not settling to him. So he wrote down the license plate, and when we ran it, we learned the driver of that car was listed as Billy Schmiermeyer. So we started looking at Billy Schmiermeyer a little bit more and learned that he had some prior arrests for criminal trespass at another senior living center in Dallas. Now we know that we need to locate Billy Schmiermeyer. There was this red jewelry box with a name of Lou T. Harris.
With the possibility of more victims on their hands, officers do a welfare check on Lou T. Harris.
4 or 5 cases quickly jumped to almost 10 cases.
An attack on a 90-year-old woman named Mary Bartell leads police to the connection of another case that might be related in another part of Dallas, where a suspect named Billy Schmiermeyer had a prior arrest for a criminal trespass at another senior living facility 2 years earlier.
Edgemere is a senior living facility in Dallas. And in April of 2016, security personnel had noticed that this man had been around and they weren't sure why, and he was given a warning not to return. Then he did return in June.
This man is stating that he was a healthcare worker involved with the location, which ultimately was not true. And Dallas PD identified him as from Billy Schmiermeyer. He had no affiliation with that location and was given a criminal trespass. So we had started looking at Billy Schmiermeyer a little bit more. Billy Schmiermeyer is an individual who came to the United States in the early 2000s from Kenya, who had a visa for a short period of time to be here to work and got into the healthcare business as a caregiver. So we started getting very suspicious that maybe our person of interest in the attack on Mary Bartell and the death of Ann Conklin is Billy Schmiermeyer. We learned from Dallas PD that Billy Schmiermeyer had a warrant out for his arrest for public intoxication out of Dallas. Detective Triviate and I discussed it and said, he's a person of interest. Let's get him in custody, bring him to the Plano Police Department jail, sit down and talk to him and see what we learn. The arrest team set several officers throughout his apartment complex. A person who we believe to be Billy Schmiermeyer drove in around 6 p.m. We had a detective near a dumpster. Billy Schmiermeyer drives to that dumpster and then discarded some items. He was able to see Billy Schmiermeyer get back into his car and drive to his assigned parking space. They went up to him and made the arrest. And when they extracted him out of the vehicle, on his person, Billy Schmiermeyer had some jewelry, bracelets, some $2 bills. As they detained him, they went and looked at the dumpster to find out what did he discard. There was this red jewelry box, and it had miscellaneous items with a name of Lou T. Harris.
With the possibility of more victims on their hands, while Billy Schmiermeyer is being detained, officers do a welfare check on Lou T. Harris, who lives in the Dallas city limits, which borders Plano, Texas.
Upon our arrival, we were told by Dallas PD that Ms. Harris was located inside the residence. The residence was secure, and she was found deceased next to her bed. Everything appeared to be natural. We discussed with Dallas PD deployment that we were investigating, specifically Mary Bartell, and that the likelihood of the weapon being a pillow, because that's what Mary Bartell described her weapon to be. They went back inside and found a smeared lipstick on Lou T. Harris's pillow. We also informed them that we found a set of keys in the center console of the car that Billy Schmemmer was arrested out of. And they confirmed that the keys go to her front door. At that point, they agreed based on what they found and our investigation with Mary Bartell, it was decided that Dallas PD Homicide needed to get involved.
I'm feeling a lot of fear and panic because we've never had police presence on our street. One of the neighbors told me Lou T had been murdered. To think that something like this would have happened to Lou T was beyond sad. Lou was friendly. She was funny.
Lou T. Harris is a fascinating woman. She had grown up in Vietnam, and she was actually airlifted out of Saigon when it fell. She married an American man, and she made a life for herself here in Texas.
In 2018, Lou was living by herself. Her husband had already passed away. So you never really thought about, we need to make sure if she needs something, because she always gave you the complete sense of independence.
The day after the arrest of Billy Schmemmer, my partner and I go to Dallas PD and go speak with Billy Schmemmer in their interview room.
Detective Trubiate. Police.
How you doing?
Martinez.
Billy Schmemmer was just like a happy person, not a worry.
Been a busy night, hasn't it?
It is.
It is.
When Billy Schmemmer was initially arrested, it was only for a Class C public intoxication, but that allows them to take him into custody and ask him questions about anything they want to. At some point after that, if they believe there's enough evidence to charge him with something else, they can.
Those people scared me yesterday, the officers was like, I thought that looked like a movie, and I was like, is this real?
Oh, it's real.
No,
Our thought process going into this is we're not going to probably get a confession from him.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
We just wanted him to talk and see what nuggets of evidence that we could use against him.
You're telling me that your phone stays with you?
Yeah.
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 No one else has that phone?
No.
When Billy Schmemmer is being detained, shockingly, he agrees to voluntarily give them his cell phone. Maybe because at that time he didn't realize that would also give the investigators access to his text messages, any photos he had on his phone, and also his GPS locations.
So Monday would be the 19th.
Yeah.
Or what'd you do that morning?
Oh, that morning I went to meet this guy on, I had a ring and to sell to this guy on, they're on 75 and Coit. There's a Starbucks there.
March 19th, when Mary Bartell was attacked and possibly Ann Conklin, he told us, he did go sell a ring. He went to Starbucks, but stayed up and down that he was never at Preston Place in the morning. He was at home at the time.
You know the Preston Place is basically adult living center?
Your phone is telling us that you're there too.
No.
When we did legal process and got his cell phone records and got his location data, that was absolutely a lie.
If you're involved in this or not?
No, I'm okay.
And he was professing that he was innocent, not worried that he did anything wrong, that evidence was showed that he did nothing wrong. And it was like, okay, do you mind giving us your DNA?
Are you allowing us to get the buckle swab?
Yeah. Okay. So okay with that? Voluntarily giving that to us?
Sure.
Make sure you're okay with that.
I am very okay. Anything in there, fingerprints, lie detector test.
Okay.
After talking to Billy Schmemmer, he was charged with the capital murder of Lou T. Harris and the attempted murder of Mary Bartell.
I want the truth.
That's I don't even need a lawyer, and I did not do any wrong.
Police.
How you doing? Martinez.
Billy Schmemmer is under arrest for the attacks and murders of elderly women in Dallas and Plano, Texas. but they want to build their cases and find more evidence to make the cases even stronger.
Early in the morning, the time we were interviewing Phyllis Schmemmer, Dallas PD was wrapping up their crime scene investigation in Lou T. Harris's home. They found that there was a receipt that showed a nearby Walmart and her making a purchase prior to her death, which led them to Walmart to investigate that further. And learned that Billy Schmemmer was also at that same Walmart just prior to Lou T. Harris being killed in her home. It is suspected that Billy Schmemmer is at that Walmart hunting for victims. He's scoping out Lou T. Harris, doing some surveillance on her, looking for opportunity, and to determine if this is going to be someone he can victimize.
As you have detectives working on the cases in Plano and in Dallas, the investigators become aware of yet another case in Richardson, Texas. Mary Brooks died 2 months prior to the first cases.
Mary Brooks was an 87-year-old woman who was living in the Dallas area. On January 31st, 2018, Mary Brooks's grandson gets a call from his mother, who's worried about her mother, and she asks him to check on her. And the grandson found that his grandmother was dead.
I was just going to do one last look at her just to make sure I didn't see any suspicious wounds or anything.
There were groceries all out on her counters. They hadn't been put away. Her family discovered missing jewelry, and there was a receipt that showed that she had been on a shopping trip to Walmart.
Richardson PD's investigation led him to the same Walmart that Lou T. Harris was at. She was grocery shopping on the day she was killed, but they didn't have a suspect at that time until we learned of Billy Schmemmer, Walmart, and Lou T. Harris. So then Richardson PD started to look, okay, can we put Billy Schmemmer at the Walmart? When Mary Brooks was there, Richardson PD was able to show in the video Billy Schmemmer was parked in relation to where Mary Brooks was parked. And when Mary Brooks returned to her car, you see the silver Nissan Altima, which is believed to be Billy Schmemmer's vehicle, exit with her and follow behind her. And shortly after is when she was found deceased. We met with Dallas PD, Richardson PD, Frisco PD. They also had some stuff that they were very interested in Billy Schmemmer being their person of interest. And when we looked at it, it's like, okay, let's look at the location data. Can we put Billy Schmemmer there? Oh, we can. We're jumping from cases to cases, and 4 or 5 cases quickly jumped to almost 10 cases. And it spiderwebbed from that point.
On July 16th, 2018, there was a phone message from a task force that was investigating a killer who went around to independent living properties. My mother, Doris Gleason's death was being investigated as a homicide. It took my breath away. On Sunday, October 30th, 2016, I drove over to pick my mother up for church. I get to the door. The door is unlocked. I walk in and see her on the floor over by the dining room table, and she was gone. She was 92. I felt shock, sadness, a bit of devastation. I had never experienced a death like that. And then when I hear that Mama had been murdered, I am floored.
The detective who was working the Schmemmer case called me to go and look at pictures of jewelry that they'd gotten off of Billy Schmemmer's phone. We asked the detective, are you implying that you think that Billy Shamirmir killed our mother? And he said, I'm convinced of it. He said, I've already pulled records from his cell phone, and his cell phone was in the vicinity of her house on Saturday and on Sunday morning before you found her dead. Suddenly you find out she's died violently, and you start the grieving process all over again. And now you're grieving a violent death.
While Billy Shamirmir is in custody, 4 different police departments are already working on all these investigations, and the number is now up to 22 different victims. This makes Billy Shamirmir one of the most horrendous, prolific serial murders in Texas history. But will there be enough evidence on any one of these cases to actually convict him?
When the case first came into our office, there was talks about that we might have a serial killer that is preying on elderly individuals. To be honest with you, I didn't think it would turn into the volume of cases that it actually turned into. I just didn't think that was possible. In the end, he had 22 indictments for capital murder and 2 indictments for attempted capital murder out of not only our county, Dallas County, but also including Collin County. It is a lot. Just had total disregard for human life. And then judicial economy, in the end, you can't try all of these cases. We had what we believed the strongest case with the Lou T. Harris. Mr. Shamirmir was found with her property hours after being with her. We went back and found him at Walmart at the same time. And so that became a very strong case for us circumstantially.
Having Mama's case not being tried was incredibly frustrating, but I also recognize the need for the strongest case. The goal was to get those convictions. And if that wasn't my mom's case, then okay.
I was brought on to Billy's case and became one of his 3 attorneys. I was intrigued in regards to the facts and allegations in and of itself, and then just the sheer number of indictments that were coming out against Mr. Shamirmir. No matter the number of indictments or charges against him, he's simply accused. And that's what we have to make the jury aware of, is until they decide something different, meaning that the state has proven its case to each and every one of them beyond a reasonable doubt. He's just simply accused of these offenses.
The challenges in this case are, let's be honest, the amount of evidence was overwhelming. Was it circumstantial? Yeah, but what a lot of circumstantial evidence. That being said, you still have to present that evidence very understandably, very concisely. And the other big challenge you always have is you still have to pick your jury, and you better not pick one bad juror.
Our goal in this case was to see that Billy Shamirmir died in prison. In these types of cases for the death penalty, we would have to go to Kenya. We would have to do those types of things to do a good full background on him. That was unavailable to us. It was unavailable to the defense. And we would have to have delayed it even further. And we needed to get resolution to this case.
In the morning, jury selection will begin in Dallas for the trial of an alleged serial killer. That is Billy Shamirmir. The pandemic is going to prevent victims' families from witnessing his trial in person.
The whole scenario was just different. We were not allowed to have anybody in the courtroom that was not part of the trial. The victims' families, they couldn't face the person who had done this to their loved one. They had to watch it like everybody else did through closed-circuit television.
If I'm on a jury in COVID time and the family members have to come in one by one with masks on to testify, that's not going to have the same impact as seeing a courtroom full of cops and victims' family members and people watching the trial. They didn't get the real feel of anybody's pain or anguish or frustration.
In opening statement, I really just want to tell the jury kind of a glimpse of what they're going to see, what they're going to hear, and how I believe the case is going to be set out. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about stalking, smothering, and stealing. When it came time to presenting evidence to the jury, we really wanted to show that there was a close connection to Billy Shamirmir and Miss Harris. When the Plano Police Department arrested Billy Shamirmir, he had in his hands the jewelry of Lou T. Harris. And I used family members to identify those items and say, yes, I recognize those as being things that she was wearing. Do you know any reason why she would get rid of these things?
No, those were her personal items that she wore every day.
We then present cell phone data showing Mr. Chemirmir's actions, placing him at locations that link directly to Lou Harris. We relied heavily on the FBI in putting together our mapping of the pattern of Billy Chemirmir on these days. Typically, he would go to a location where there is a victim. He would stay there for a certain amount of time, pick his victim, murder them, take their jewelry. Then he would travel down to a known location where you could sell these items and then head back home.
All right, cell phone records we see here, March 15th, March 19th, and March 20th.
Yes, sir.
So the response to this state, asserting that Billy was at these locations by way of the cell phone data, what their expert is able to say is that the device that they believe belonged to Billy Chemirmir was pinged or located in certain areas, but they cannot say that it was actually Billy himself. It's simply the device.
The defense's strategy in this case, with the overwhelming amount of evidence that there was to try to create reasonable doubt. You try to poke holes in each witness little by little and argue reasonable doubt. In this case, you would think that's a stretch because there was so much evidence, but sometimes that tactic works.
In criminal trials, using evidence of other crimes or bad acts is generally not admissible. However, it can be for limited purposes. In this case, it was more for motive and identity, since no one actually saw him kill anyone, but we wanted them to know that this same person with the same profile and the same similar acts had been with other women who were killed. This is the correct person. We have the right person.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
We decided to go with Mary Bartell because she brings to this case a voice for all the victims. She is the victim who survived, and she was able to tell her story through deposition.
I heard this very insistent rapping at the door. The door was opening inward, and when my eyes were just fixated on these green rubber gloves, I knew instantly, number one, I should not have opened the door. Number two, my life was in grave danger. He just smashed a pillow down hard over my face and my chest, and I just couldn't breathe.
The defense lawyer was able to cross-examine her in her deposition the same way he would have in the courtroom before COVID happened.
She said the individual that walked in was very articulate and very well spoken, and asked about an accent. She said she didn't recall hearing an accent.
You didn't notice any kind of accent or anything about his voice that stood out to you?
No, I was just mainly concerned about whether I could get some help before I died.
And anyone that's ever heard Billy speak, he has a very thick accent. And that's important. The jury needs to understand that that's important.
Did you ever look at his face?
I was fixated by the green rubber gloves.
Okay, so you never did get a look at his face?
No, I did not.
There was nothing that placed him there except for Mary Bartell. And so if you think she's mistaken or that credibility is not as high as what you would like it to be as a juror, then you set that case aside and ask yourself, is the evidence sufficient to prove that it was Billy beyond all reasonable doubt?
We wanted to show Mr. Chemirmir's interrogation video because Billy Chemirmir did not have a good story as to why he's in possession of Lou T. Harris's items. He stated that he acquired them from a man on the side of the road. He couldn't give us the man's name. It just seems so illogical that he is at Walmart with Lou T. Harris and then happens to buy from some random man her items hours later and is caught with them.
You had their money. You had their jewelry, and you had their jewelry box.
I believe them playing his statement backfired a little bit. And the reason I say that is because he gave himself a defense.
Do you think that the items are stolen?
That was what I was thinking, because I was like, why is he bringing all this, the box with everything?
Way too many times in my career, when I was getting ready for trial, I would tell my main detective, I'm not going to offer your interview of the defendant. And they would get very upset. And I would say, no, it's self-serving. He doesn't tell the whole truth. He minimizes his involvement. He acts like it's self-defense. Why would I offer his version of what happened? By presenting the videotaped interview of Billy Shamirmir, the state allowed that to be his way of putting his defense on. And they weren't able to cross-examine him at the same time because he never had to testify. And the state doesn't get to say, we call Billy Shamirmir to the stand. It's not up to them. If he chooses not to testify, that's the end of his story.
That's what this entire case is about, is reasonable doubt. And it is rampant.
There was so much evidence that they had introduced.
You've seen an exorbitant amount of evidence and items put in, but we're talking about quality and not quantity.
And that was my argument, is they're presenting all these things, but what is the quality of this evidence in regards to them meeting their burden?
In this day and age, with what juries expect today with modern forensics, which I'm so sick of hearing, there's no such thing as too much evidence. I wish we could all have that problem.
This is the first time in my career as a prosecutor I have been accused of bringing too much evidence. It was mentioned a couple of times that this is going to be a difficult chore on your part. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it's going to be that difficult. Once we concluded closing statements, case is in the jury's hands. We just have to wait now for their answer.
I happened to be there in the courthouse, and the evidence was so well laid out. So we were expecting 30 minutes later the jury to come back. And as that jury waited and waited and waited and then went home to come back the next day, we were very concerned.
And it went a little longer and kept going a little longer. And I said, well, somebody's back there thinking.
This case should have been a slam dunk, and you would expect a quick verdict. But it took over 2 days. The jury was still deliberating, and they still hadn't come up with a verdict.
After several notes that were sent out by the jury, they were deadlocked, unable to reach a verdict.
Judge Jones, we remain deadlocked at 11-1. After additional deliberation, we've received no change.
Then I moved and requested a mistrial, and it was granted.
Mistrial has occurred, or a hung jury has occurred.
We are just disappointed that they could not come to the correct and obvious. Yeah.
I don't have a word to describe the unfairness, the injustice.
Given that Lou T. Harris's case was, by the prosecutor's judgment, their strongest case, and they got a hung jury, they had to have been devastated when they got that back. Unfortunately, what all those family members learned is with the jury, you never know what's going to happen.
When I heard of the mistrial, I was disappointed for the families and immediately started thinking about participating in the second trial.
The elected DAs in big counties have a huge office to run. 300 lawyers work for them. So when the DA, John Creuzot, comes aboard to try the case with Glenn Fitzmartin, that's a big deal.
We went into the second trial terrified of another mistrial.
I think there was also resolve on the part of the families to come back and make sure that we did whatever we could to help the DA to close that case on the next time through.
In the second trial, the COVID restrictions have lessened a little bit. So we're now able to put the courtroom back to the way we're used to it, where spectators are allowed in, family members are allowed in.
The court was filled with so many families from other victims feeling like that may be their day in court, and certainly hoping for justice for Lou T., but also justice for their family members also.
I've been licensed for 42 years, and I was a judge for 22 years, so I saw a lot of cases tried. To me, voir dire is probably the most important part of the case.
Voir dire, it's not the glamorous part, but it's the part where you better not get it wrong, because if you do, one juror can ruin everything. In this case, they had to voir dire question a whole big group of people at the same time, and then to decide how many strikes they were going to use against how many people.
So looking back after we had a hung jury, I thought that we could do better in the jury selection process. I think the art of jury selection is understanding what your issues and problems are and being able to fashion a voir dire that help them understand exactly what the law was. For example, circumstantial evidence, and helping them understand that circumstantial evidence does not mean weak evidence, and committing to, if we prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt with circumstantial evidence, they could return a verdict of guilty.
It makes me crazy that too many people think that circumstantial evidence cases are weak, because they're not, and they never have been, and they never will be. Because every little piece points to the same thing, and every little piece is the truth. And when you put them all together, how beautiful can that be?
The main difference in this trial is that you do not see the taped police interview with Billy Shamir.
I didn't go to anybody's apartment.
When they didn't play the interview at the arrest, that was a game changer, because that way he wasn't able to spew his lies without any cross-examination.
During the closing argument, District Attorney Crusoe linked the evidence back to what he had talked to the jurors about in his voir dire in the selection of the jury.
I told them we're counting on them to do what they promised under oath that they would do, and reminding them of the issues that we went over with them, especially circumstantial evidence. If you had said no, you wouldn't be on this jury. We brought you the evidence, and the only thing left is your job to deliberate, follow the law, and in our opinion, return a verdict of guilty.
The argument it's still beyond a reasonable doubt that it's extremely circumstantial. Argument is still that there's no direct evidence placing him in the home of Lou T. Harris. There's no direct evidence placing him on the street of Miss Harris. There's no direct evidence even in the extraneous case that places him in Miss Bartell's home or neighborhood.
At the end of all the closing arguments, I think there's a healthy amount of anxiety in everybody in the courtroom, especially the families, because they've watched this not turn out well a few months before. And for me, I know, because of 42 years of practicing law, that I have no idea what they're going to do.
This was a stunningly fast verdict for a capital murder trial. Jury deliberated less than an hour.
It's like pins and needles. It's high anxiety. But we had the rug pulled out from us before, so our trust is really low that this is going to be okay.
The jury has reached a verdict, and that verdict is: we, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
Billy Shamir was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And I knew at that moment in time that Billy Shamir would die in prison.
I have goosebumps when the jury renders the conviction that he is guilty. There is such a flood of relief.
On behalf of the many victims, we are incredibly relieved that justice is finally here, especially after the mistrial 5 months ago.
There was a lot of relief and joy that justice had finally been done.
About time. Why did it take two? But everybody's just as happy as can be that he's never going to get out of prison.
I look at Lucci's death and could sound strange, but I think that she would be proud to know that she ended all of that, all of those killings, that was the end. After her, that was it. And they got him.
Well, what was satisfying about this verdict was that Mr. Shamir had announced to a news station that he would never go to the penitentiary. And when that verdict came back, of course, I looked at him. He didn't have much expression, but I thought, you're on your way, buddy.
I think the whole experience has got us both thinking about how to protect elderly people.
When I worked through that, Mama was the 8th victim in 3.5 months, and that this had happened at 3 other well-respected properties in the Metroplex. That's when I knew that something had to change. Secure Our Senior Safety is a nonprofit foundation committed to showing the vulnerabilities in independent senior living and hopefully correcting those vulnerabilities. SOSS is proud that we got 2 bills through on legislation to change the security in independent living. My mother was incredibly private, and that was a real big struggle for me in the beginning. She believed a lady's name was in the paper when she got married and when she died. And so for my mother's face to be splattered everywhere in her name, my mother would not like that. But over time, I think Mama understands my commitment to make her friends safer than she had been. And in that way, I think she's proud of it.
Can you imagine the impact and the horror that came on over 20 different families because of all the people that Billy Shamir murdered? I think the good that came of this is that those facilities have made stronger safeguards. Some laws have changed to try and ensure that that keeps happening. And let's hope that when we have our grandparents and parents and even us go into places like that from now on, they're way more protected as a result of what happened in this case.